Everybody, welcome to Chapter 3 lecture on terrestrial biomes. We'll start by just defining what a biome is in ecology. A biome is a large-scale terrestrial community shaped by the physical environment, and it's categorized by dominant plant growth forms and characteristics such as leaf deciduousness or succulence. So deciduous means that a plant would lose its leaves every season. Succulence is an adaptation for a hot and dry environment. So biomes are characterized by the dominant plant growth forms. And this is where I typically ask my classes, why would we use plants to characterize biomes? Why wouldn't we use animals and the types of animals that live in an area to characterize it? Well, the short answer is that plants don't move. Plants can't move, and so they're much easier to study in terms of an assemblage. And what we have found with community ecology is that there are very predictable assemblages of plants all across the globe. And I want to quickly introduce to you something called the lapse rate. I guess we've already introduced it in a prior lecture, but I want to show you an example of what it means. The lapse rate basically means that as you go up in elevation, you're going to get colder and colder temperatures. You're also going to get more and more precipitation. And so this is a figure showing you different biological mountain plant zones. So we have the lower montane, we have the montane zone, subalpine, and alpine zone. And what you can see is as you increase in elevation, what happens to the temperature? It predictably goes down. That's the lapse rate. We talked about the fact that that's due to things like there being fewer molecules present once air expands that high. Mean precipitation also goes up. So we can use a predictable relationship like that of temperature and precipitation to make some predictions about where vegetation might be similar. If you look at these two cacti, you would probably think that they were related, but in fact, they are completely unrelated. They have simply just evolved the exact same, or at least extremely similar structures and forms because they've evolved in similar physical conditions. So they both live in hot, dry deserts, and even though one is in the Sahara and one is in Arizona in the United States, they still, due to convergent evolution, they have similar form, even though they do not share a common evolutionary ancestor. And so that's what convergent evolution is. It's evolution into similar shape and form, even though you do not have a common related ancestor. This figure shows just how significant and important combinations of precipitation and temperature are in determining terrestrial biomes. You can see along the x-axis we have annual average temperature, and on the y-axis we have annual precipitation. So low precipitation to high and low temperature to high. Let's go up into the top right-hand corner up here where we have high precipitation and high temperature. This is showing us that this is where you would find a tropical rainforest biome. Okay, I know we haven't gone through the individual biomes yet, but hopefully you were able to watch at least the introductory video to this lecture from Chapter 3. If you go down just a little bit with annual precipitation and just a little bit with temperature, you end up with what is sometimes known as a temperate rainforest. This is, I believe, in our textbook, what is referred to as a deciduous rainforest. Um, a temperate seasonal forest would be right here. If you were to increase the average annual temperature, you can see that's where you would find a savanna or a tropical seasonal forest, which those are both kind of analogous terms. Boreal forest, that's also known as the taiga. Now we're getting towards the colder areas where tundra and boreal forests are the coldest. But boreal forests not only have a slightly higher temperature, they also have slightly higher precipitation. So I would like you to be able to read and interpret this diagram and be able to predict at certain conditions where you might find different biomes if you were to be given this figure. Okay, something that I wanted to introduce you to in this lecture is a climate diagram. These are provided for each of the terrestrial biomes that are introduced to you in Chapter 3, and I'd like you to be able to read them, interpret them. I'd like you to be able to look at them and know which biome is being described, basically because you know how to interpret it. This is a good figure because it has a lot of things going on. You see the dotted line. This is the line that is 0 degrees. This represents anything below it. You're not going to be able to have sufficient temperature for plant growth. Okay, so sub-freezing average monthly temperatures. That's going to be highlighted in blue. So if it's too cold for plants to survive, it's going to be highlighted in blue. Something else to point out to you. When you get an area of yellow, that means that you have insufficient precipitation for plant growth. And whenever the precipitation line drops below the temperature line, that's when you're going to have insufficient precipitation. Okay? Anytime that line drops below it. Alternatively, well, I'll wait till we have an example to talk about temperature. Okay, I'm going to not go through in depth the characteristics of the biomes that have already been explained in the previous video. Instead, I'm just going to point out their climate diagrams for you to make sure they make sense and introduce the biomes that weren't particularly described in the introductory video. So tropical rainforests, when you look at this figure, you should notice several things. It's pretty consistent over the course of the year. You have consistent high precipitation and consistently high temperature. Okay, so that's an easy climate diagram to interpret. For savannas, also known as tropical seasonal forests, you have two areas associated with an intertropical convergence zone moving that are areas of very high rainfall. So that's what's going on with the high precipitation. Notice there's even a break in the scale. So you have seasonal rain and seasonal dry periods. Here's that yellow where the precipitation line has dropped below the temperature line, and so here this is insufficient for plant growth. You do not have enough water for plants to grow during this time. Deserts show insufficient water for plants to grow 24/7 throughout the 12 months of the year. And even so, that doesn't mean that nothing is able to grow. You do have desert blooms, but all the plants are very highly adapted to having very low and sporadic rainfall. So here in the desert, you can see that you have very low, consistently low, almost no water, and you have cold periods, and you have exceptionally hot periods in the desert too during the summer months. All right, temperate grasslands, you can see show a pretty temperate, which basically means mild, climate diagram, where you only have a little bit of period where it is too cold to grow vegetation, and you always have sufficient precipitation in grasslands. Temperate shrublands and woodlands. This is one that was not introduced to you in the first video, so I wanted to make sure that you recognized this climate diagram. There is an area where temperature is, where precipitation drops below temperature, and so here you do not have sufficient water for plants. Temperate shrublands and woodlands are also known as chaparral environments or a Mediterranean climate. And I've included in just a few notes, since this was not introduced to you in the prior video. This biome is typically located between 30 and 40 degrees latitude, and they're made up of evergreen shrubs and trees. It's known as the Mediterranean climate. You get wet winters and hot, dry summers. Okay, so you can see wet winters and hot, dry summers if you're looking at the climate diagram. Okay, and I wanted to emphasize that fire is very common in helping to maintain this biome. When we talk about community succession, fire is an agent that kind of comes through and helps reset the vegetation periodically, so it doesn't all just grow up in one direction. It kind of gets cleared out every once in a while. Some of the adaptations that you'll find in plants are evergreen leaves that allow plants to live and be active during cooler, wetter periods. Plants also have lower nutrient requirements in this biome. And sclerophyllous leaves are an adaptation where leaves get to be tough and leathery. And this is to help not only deter being eaten by herbivores, it's to help prevent wilting during dry seasons. Oh, it's also an adaptation to a lot of plants that are used to fire. All right, temperate deciduous forests. This should be familiar to you. This is where we are located in the southeast United States. During the winter, we have short periods where it might be too cold for vegetation to grow, but otherwise we have year-round sufficient precipitation and almost year-round temperature. So again, this is a very temperate diagram, very mild. All right, a temperate evergreen forest. This was left out of the previous video. So I wanted to show you because you have very different periods of where you got moisture and temperature kind of going together in a big dip here. So what you're looking at with temperate evergreen forests are coastal, continental, and maritime zones. Sorry. If you look at the map, there's only a few areas that are characterized by these, and you're looking, the Pacific Northwest is one example. Okay, so just think of Pacific Northwest. It's lower diversity than tropical and deciduous forests, and leaves tend to be acidic. Soils tend to be nutrient poor. You get high amount of rainfalls, and you have mild winters. Okay, that's what the Pacific Northwest and other temperate evergreen forests are known for. All right, boreal forests. These are also known as the taiga. This is a cold environment, so you see a lot of area during the year where it's blue in the climate diagram, which remember that means that it's freezing, it's below 0 degrees, so it's insufficient temperature for plant growth. However, there is enough precipitation to support things like coniferous trees and shrubs. And so there is sufficient precipitation throughout the year, just not temperature. Finally, if we get to tundra, that temperature area shrinks even smaller. So it's the same shape as we would see in the taiga, except there's even less time during the year and where it's below zero, and you have less precipitation throughout the year. So that's why everything is very grows close to the ground. You don't have trees. All right, thanks. That was the summary of all the different biomes. I hope that was helpful in explaining some of the ones that you haven't seen yet. Let me know if you have any questions.